Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Cameron Brauer. He has had numerous strange and fascinating contact experiences, and he is creator of the My Alien Life podcast. Cameron, how you doing tonight?
Good, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And you know, I have never had a contact experience, paranormal, abduction, that I know of at least. And I've never even seen a UFO. And I love having guests like yourself that has had these experiences that could help us, understand them a little bit better. Where did this all start for you? I understand you were doing research at a very early age.
Sort of. Thanks again for having me on, and don't think that's, if you've never experienced that, don't think it's a bad thing, because as you've heard and as you know, when I listen to your show, many people have had some pretty harrowing experiences, and then again, people have had amazing experiences, and mine have been not so amazing. So it kind of started with me at a young age. I was I don't know if I'd call myself a researcher back then, but I had this really, really profound curiosity. And one of my best friends, who just lived down the street, and we were best friends since we were 3 years old, we spent a lot of time together. It was one of these places that it was safe for kids to be out on the street at all hours of the day and night. So our parents kind of just cut us free in the morning, and we spent the day together. And the guy that I hung out with and continued to hang out with, all through my high school years and just a couple of years into college, he real smart guy. And we kind of had this inside competition between us, where he was always coming up with these amazing things. And being from a small town, there was no library, there wasn't a lot of information, and there wasn't a lot of access to information there. And he always had all this incredible information. I remember when we were 5 years old, he would come up with the most amazing things that I had ever heard. And even like when we were 12 years old, he came to me one day and said, he was going to go with his parents, or later they were going to see Star Wars. And I'd never even heard of Star Wars at that time. And he knew all about it, and I never could figure out where he got all this information. And I've never found out where he got all this information. But what that did for me was gave me this desire, this strange desire for information. And again, we didn't have a library. Very few books in the school library where I started in the town in kindergarten. So one time in particular, and I think it was around 1972, we had one church in the town, and every year they would have this church rummage sale. And to me, it was the greatest thing in the world. I mean, there was not a lot to do in that town, and anything that was new and unusual, I was usually on board. But in this case, I looked forward to this. I'd probably only been to 2 max during those first early years of my life. So I'd ask my mom if I could walk over, and I probably walked over when I was 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old by myself. It was maybe 3-4 blocks away, and she would give me $1. And one time in particular, I picked up my few things that I could get for $1, and I had picked up this little black book, and didn't think much of it, but had a little pen attached to it. I don't really remember if then I actually looked through it to see what was inside of it, but I just thought it was a really cool book, so I picked it up. And I think I probably paid 10 cents or something like that. And it was one of those things that really, really changed my life. It was a little address book, slightly smaller than a business card, and I have it right here. See that? But a little bit smaller than a business card. I've carried it with me my whole life. Has a 1957 calendar in it, so it was made prior to 1957. And you know, it it was just really, really unusual for me because, I remember going home and later on I opened it and there really wasn't much in it. There was a few phone numbers, but there was the name Clarence Thomas. And why that name struck me, I have no idea. I didn't know any Clarence Thomas or Thomases in the town, and my parents didn't know a Clarence Thomas. And I checked, and I know over the years I'd asked other people around town if they knew a Clarence Thomas. Um, but I spent countless hours back then wondering who the man was, and the only other clue, in that address book there was a phone number under his name, and it said 442-2111. And so I had asked, I didn't really know much about phone numbers back then, and I know my mom told me that every number in town started with 337. So to me, that was incredible because I automatically thought that that number must be very, very far away. As a child of 5, 6, 7 years old, everything in that town was very, very far away. And, it didn't occur to me to dial the number because, at that time I really, had only answered the phone a few times, I would imagine, and I'd never called anyone. And so that was one of the things that happened early on that made me curious about the world, in addition to my best friend who was always coming up with these amazing things, and we would go on amazing adventures, throughout this little town of a couple of hundred people. But that little phone book I carried with me, throughout my whole life, and what it really means to me even now, I don't know, but it started something. And so I always thought about this guy, Clarence Thomas, like I said, and for several months I decided, after several months I decided one day that, I was thinking about the phone. I knew that I could call my best friend. I'd never called him before. I had asked my mom how to dial the phone. I remember that vividly. And so one day I tried to call him down the street, and he lived, just maybe 2 blocks. I picked up the phone, and I remember I could hear this hum, and I knew that it meant it was okay for me to dial. And I listened to that sound, and I listened, and I listened, and then all of a sudden there was silence, and it went away. And I thought I did something wrong, and then all of a sudden I heard this female voice from the other end. It said, "Who are you trying to reach?" And I was just flabbergasted. I didn't know what to say, and I was startled and stunned, and I could only, I uttered the word Scotty. The female voice said, "What number are you calling from?" And that was even a bigger puzzle because I had no idea what she even meant or what our phone number was. And I just said, I remember I said 14, and then I didn't say anything. And I said 14 again. And then she said 1414, or asked me the question 1414. So I said, yeah. And then I hung up the phone. And the next day I decided, maybe it was the next day, a week later, I don't know. But I remember trying it again. And after the hum, I listened again, and there was that same hum, and it went away, and the voice asked me the same question again. And I said 1414. And she said, what number you're calling? And I said 442-2111, because that was the phone number in my little phone book. And she said Montana, and which I had no idea what that meant, because we lived in I knew I lived in Montana, and the only thing that came to my mind was Washington, which was really, at that time of my life, the only other state that I'd been in. And she said thank you, and suddenly the phone's ringing in my ear, and then somebody actually answered the phone, and I remember a man's voice say, "Yeah," and who is this? And and the only thing I could think of, I was thinking about our neighbor named Bob, so I said Bob, and the guy said to me, "Who's Bob?" And the man said, or who's Bob? And I said, Clarence Thomas. and, and he said, "There's no Clarence Thomas here," and then he hung up. And that was kind of what got the whole thing started, was this address book and my ability to make phone calls. So at that point, that day, I literally realized that I didn't know that we were on a party line at the time. I didn't know what that meant. However, later on, I knew that I could pick up the phone, and as soon as the operator came on, I could give her a number and she would dial the number. And my parents never got charged for those calls because the operator, for some reason, because of the whatever was going on with this party line, she couldn't figure out what number I was calling from. So I could just make up a number and I could say that number. And I always said 442-2111, and somewhere somebody was getting charged for those phone calls. But it made me realize that I could call other places. And and one of the things that I did later on, I remember calling a library into town that was a couple hundred miles away, and I just remember, I don't remember exactly what I was calling for, but I knew that I was going to ask a question about a book that I had heard of. And we didn't have that at our school library. And, it was that point forward that I knew that anytime I wanted, any information, I could make a phone call. Or if I could figure out who to call, I could make a phone call and get information from people. So that's what I did. So over years and years and years, I literally spoke to librarians and museums and universities and newspapers. I spoke to janitors, and I would call and tell them my name is Clarence Thomas. And sometimes I told them I was from the news. And they always talked. I mean, it was very, very rare. I don't even remember an occasion really where somebody didn't talk to me. So I would ask these questions and I would get this information and maybe I'd call them back again. But over the years I carefully kept a few phone numbers in that little book. There's not a lot of pages in that book, and it already had some phone numbers in it. So really I kept a few numbers, and some were my go-to numbers that I would call. There was a library in Denver, and it must have been the Denver Public Library. I would guess the last time I called that would have been probably maybe when I was a freshman in high school. That was long ago. So that was before the internet, and that's where I would get my information, and that's kind of also how I got information about things like UFOs, which I was in the mid to late 70s I was hearing about for the first time on the radio, and it just opened my whole world, just like the internet did a couple decades later.
So when did you have your first contact or paranormal experience?
The one that I know of, what happened was I did have an experience and when I was in my teens, and that kind of opened my eyes and made me wonder about things that maybe had happened in the past. Just a lot of stuff happened, but the one thing that really happened that opened my eyes and made me realize that maybe this had happened before, because I had some experiences that I really couldn't explain when I was very, very young. But those experiences, there was quite a few when I was very, very young, and to me that seemed like was a part of life and part of growing up. It was just part of my life, and I didn't really think about that was something different that maybe wasn't happening to somebody else. And when I was younger, there was nothing, there wasn't really a negative thing that happened with me, but the memory stuck in my mind. But I was about 16. I was sleeping, and we had I lived in the basement of or had a bedroom in the basement of my house, and one early morning or whatever it was, I just was aware that all of a sudden it felt like somebody slapped me on the forehead, and it was fairly significant because I could feel it sting in my forehead, and not only that, I heard it, and felt it, and made me wake up like instantly. And what I thought it was my littler younger brother, who probably came downstairs and was time to get up, and my mom told him to wake me up, and he, being a typical brother, is going to whack me on the head. Well, I opened my eyes, and it was fairly dark in the room, and I could tell that it was in the middle of the night sometime. And one of the other things that was significant was that in the next room, it was spring, and my mom always grew tomatoes in there to put outside later. And so there was some artificial light coming from the other room. And the other thing I noticed was that I was arched backwards, and I was kind of, instead of looking at the ceiling, laying on my back, I was actually looking kind of back at the headboard, and I could see my clock. And I could see that it was 3:33 a.m. And so I sat up, and it was hard to sit up because all the pillows were under my back. So every pillow on my bed was stacked on top of each other underneath my back, and there's probably 3, maybe 4. And as I sat up, I kind of reached this tipping point where now the pillows were behind my back. I froze because right there I'm looking at a figure that's literally standing at the foot of my bed. And it was a typical, people describe this all the time, a typical tall gray. And it was just a little bit to my left, and but dead in front of me, maybe a foot to my left, in front of the bed. And I could tell that it was not standing, but it was floating, and it was standing perpendicular to me. It was looking at the wall to my left. And what was unusual, it was kind of barely kind of moving around, like bobbing up and down and back and forth, because it was floating. And so at that point, I was terrified. I was frozen. I couldn't move, and I don't know if I just didn't move because it was so frightening, or if I couldn't move. Those are two different things. But nonetheless, I'm staring at this creature in front of my bed, and I'm very aware of what's going on around me. I'm sweating at this point.
Now you said typical gray. There's a lot of different descriptions that people have. There's apparently different types of grays. Well, I mean, what exact color was it, and could you describe maybe the facial features a little bit?
Yeah, I would say, it was somewhere between gray and brown. Maybe, the light behind me that was bouncing off its skin was, highlighting different parts of it. But it was wearing an outfit. I mean, it was wearing like, couldn't really remember now if it was wearing pants, but it was wearing like a yellow rain jacket and a rain hat, and they matched. And they were shiny, and they looked wet. And I could just see the side of its head. And but I kept watching that head. I could see the outline of eyes, and I knew that this thing was gradually and very slowly turning toward me. And I was kind of estimating at that time it could take up to an hour maybe for him to fully face me. But I knew when I looked into those eyes that it was going to be just unbelievable terror like I'd never experienced before, and I wasn't looking forward to that part. And I watched, and it was, like I said, it was 3:33 in the morning when I first noticed this, and it went on and it went on. It didn't seem like it was going to end. And I actually, in the springtime, the birds start chirping really, really early, 5:30, something like that, 5 o'clock. And after a while, I could hear birds chirping just, once in a while, and then I could hear more birds chirping. And I was gripping the sheets with my hands, and I could feel sweat just soaking into my my bedding underneath me. And I watched this thing, and as it turned toward me, and I could see 2/3 of its face. I couldn't see its right eye very well, but its mouth was turned down, and like a frown, and it looked like it was scared to death. I mean, it looked like it was scared. And I've posted sort of an artist depiction of that I've seen other people post before, which was very, very similar, and it's on my Facebook page. But yeah, it was terrifying. It was a terrifying moment, and from that morning forward, I started.
Well,
I never
before
quit
we
thinking
move
about that.
on, was there any
Sure,
communication or anything between you and this entity? And
not at
how did
all.
it end? I mean, did it just, you know, leave, or, did it disappear? What happened?
I was having a hard time breathing. It was really terrifying. And as I looked at this face, and it wasn't looking at me. I mean, as far as I knew, it was looking at the wall behind me. It was looking at whatever, but I didn't feel that it was looking at me, and I didn't want to move because I didn't want to. I felt the whole time if I moved or did anything, I would attract its attention, and I didn't want it turning toward me, looking at me, nothing. So, I was frozen in fear. And, I was trying not to breathe hard because I didn't want to make any noise. And, I mean, literally, I passed out. And, I woke up a couple hours later. But, I would say that maybe for 90 minutes to an hour that this went on, just this, I called it a Mexican standoff. I looked at it, and I don't know what it looked at, but yeah, frightening.
So what did you do after that happened? I mean, did you tell your parents or anything like that?
I did. I mentioned it to my mom, and she didn't have anything to say about it really, and which I can understand because it's really unusual, and I mean, maybe there are other people who experienced this, and maybe she had, and maybe she didn't want to talk about it. Who knows? But we didn't really talk about it. Um, and for the most part, I brought it up, and you know, I kind of stopped talking. After she kind of didn't have much to say, I just quit, and I never brought it up again. But it was something that I thought about and always have every day. After that, and trying to put the pieces together. What that exactly was, and what exactly happened. Is it going to happen again? That was the big thing, was the question. And then I started asking, had it happened in the past? And I started thinking about all these unusual things that had happened to me. And yeah, yeah, there were some things, other things that started to make sense that hadn't before.
Well, if you could you talk about some of those experiences that kind of gave you more insight into what happened after you experienced that occurrence?
So as a young kid, I was had another, I was about 5 years old, and had another really odd experience that I had to sum up with the experience that I just told you about, and possibly was trying to see how it related to things that had happened previously. Another time, I was five-ish. We had a doctor in our town, and he was kind of a farm doctor that went around to different towns. But we would see this doctor from, we'd have to drive. If you had a doctor's appointment, you'd drive to see the doctor. And my older brother had been sick, and so we had gone to see the doctor, and the doctor basically told my parents that both of us needed our tonsils out, which now that's pretty unusual for two brothers, 7 years apart, to go and get their tonsils out when, only one brother has been having issues with sore throats and things like that. So when the time came, I was just a little kid, and I was scared to death and really didn't know what was going on, but I knew that we'd gotten to the hospital, and my parents were going to leave us there. And I had no idea what that was about, and I don't think they probably would have told me, but um, they were getting ready to leave the room, and to me, I'm thinking that they're leaving, they're gone. So at that point right there is the point where I have two distinct memories of the same event. And, you know, how I can have two distinct memories of the same event, I don't know, but I've had those two memories for as long as I can remember, at least from that point on. I'm sure of it. But um, one of the memories is my parents leave, and then they come back, and not long, they weren't gone long, and you know, I had changed into a kind of a gown thing, and they came back, and then they waited there until they came and got my brother and I, and then my brother and I we were on a gurney of some sort, and we got wheeled away, and I kind of have a recollection of maybe we walked a little bit through the room too, but um, and then, you know, I woke up in the room and my parents are there, and that was that. The other memory I have is of me getting out of, either I put on this gown or they wanted me to put on this gown, and I took off running. And I'm running down this hall, and I can feel that there's a presence behind me, and I can see it, can't see it, but I feel that there's, you know, there's this fog. It's all around me. So I can't see left or right. I can't see. I knew I couldn't see backwards if I looked, and I couldn't see much forward, but I'm still running into this fog, and I have this recollection of this hallway is smaller, and it's closing in, and it's not really a with right angles. Everything seems rounded, like I'm almost like I'm in a tunnel. And as I'm running, something steps out to my right, and I don't want to look at it because I'm afraid of what I'll see. And it puts its hand kind of in the mid back to lower back against my body, and I'm off the ground, and I'm floating. And it just feels like my whole body is attached to this hand in my back. And, you know, at will, it's moving me and maneuvering me through the hallways and in different places. And, you know, I can't really see where I am, but, you know, that's another case where, you know, it was so terrifying that then again, I wake up and I'm in somewhere, the hospital room. But, you know, to me, I don't know if anything, if that experience had anything to do with being in the hospital, or if I'm combining those two experiences that happened in two different places. But, you know, later on, my younger brother, who was 7 years younger, was 7 years older than me, and I had a brother that was 7 years younger than me. He would tell me that, you know, when he was 3 years old, you know, which we didn't talk about anything paranormal in the house. It was just, you know, nobody was really interested in that. There really wasn't anything on TV about that. But, you know, I would have been about 10. He was about 3. He would tell me periodically over the next few years that sometimes he wakes up down in the front entryway of the house because these little guys come and get him. They're gray with big eyes, and they come and get him at night, and they take him outside, and then they bring him back, and then they leave him in the front entryway of the house. So that's kind of unusual.
So after this, did you have any other contact experiences growing up?
I did, and you know, some of them. There was one that I podcast about, which is I guess it's really different because it was a group thing, and it was what happened was my friend Scotty, who was older, he got a car, and we decided that we were going to go do something. I don't even remember what it was, but you know, I was like around a freshman in high school at that time, and we were driving, and he said that you know, it was late May, and he knew that where the seniors in high school were having a keg, and I said, okay, well, whatever. So, and all of a sudden, he drives off the road, and we're headed down this trail through the grass, and we go into this ravine, and we get in there, and there's a group of people there, and they have a fire there. There's a few cars down there, and the cars are all kind of facing the fire, and it's a big fire. And we get out. Everybody's significantly older than I am. I'm not in high school yet, really, and he was, and so I knew most of these people, and just because I grew up around them, but they were still older. So he was kind of on his own and doing his own thing with other people, and there was kind of a couple different groups of people, and some were standing in front of the cars, some were if you're inside of a car, there was a group right in front of the cars, and to the right there was a group. And so I went over to the right where there was a group of people kind of standing. I'm talking like 3 or 4 people. There wasn't a lot of people down there, but there was a big rock there. And so I sat on this rock. I'm looking at this fire, and I sat there, and one of the older guys came over, and I'm sure he probably about graduating age, quite a bit older than me, 4 or 5 years. And a lot of them had beer, and he said, I don't remember if he asked me if I wanted one or he told me I shouldn't have one, but I said, yeah, I'm not going to drink any beer. And he goes, I think I have a grape pop soda in my truck. Do you want that? And I said, yeah. And so we went to his truck and walked over there, and reached in there and pulled out this grape soda that was, I could feel it, that it had been it was dusty, and I knew it had been in the truck for a long time. So, so what? So I went back over to my rock, and I sat there, and I popped the top on that, and I took a couple drinks, and yeah, it was kind of warm, but it was still all right. And I'm just watching the fire. I'm kind of falling into a bit of a zone, and I'm watching this fire, and it was just the oddest thing that I'm looking at this fire, and all of a sudden everything changes, and trying to piece it together, like what just changed, what's different, and there's no fire, and there's no people talking, because it was steady voices, quite a few, a dozen or so people talking, and fairly loud, and all of a sudden it's silent, and there's no fire, and I'm sitting there by myself. There's nobody around me, and I'm looking exactly where I was looking before, right through the fire, and kind of there was a hillside, not maybe 50 feet away, slight hillside, and something just catches my eye over there, and I'm looking, and something that's really, really familiar, and it's can pop that I had in my hand, soda, and it's not in my hand anymore, and like there's no way it could be over there, 40, 50 feet away, and so that's what's on my mind at this point. I want to go over there and see if what happened, why it's over there, and if it's the same one, and if it's the same one, how did it get there? And I'm then the next thing I'm aware of is people to my left of me. There's a couple of people in front of the cars, and the headlights in the cars seem like yellowish. They're not as bright as they were before. And we were there. I think we got there at 10ish or something like that. But that's not important. But so we're, there's still people there, and there's like somebody's getting their car and they're getting ready to leave, and I'm looking for my friend Scotty, and I don't see him, and so I walk over and I pick up the it's grape soda, and it's the same weight, same temperature still, and but it's not in my hand, and it feels colder out. I was wearing I wasn't dressed heavily, but at night in Montana, it cools off quick. So it's suddenly colder, and all these things happen at once. It just changes. There's all this change, and I'm trying to process it. My mind is just a whir. It's almost like it's numb because there's so many things that I'm taking in that are different. And keep in mind that there's other clues out there that I'm not even considering. I'm sure the sky looks different. Many things look different. But all of a sudden, me and my friend Scotty, we realized that it's like after almost 3 a.m, so like 4, 5, 6 hours later, whatever it was. And we both, or I don't see him at that point, but I yell for him, and he's right there, and he's just kind of, I don't know what he was doing until he heard me yell, but kind of just standing there. And, we ran to his car, and, I said, we got to get out of here. Like right now, we're going to be in trouble. We got to get home. And so, we hop in the car, and, we head home, and, never talked about it. Still haven't talked about it, and we never will talk about it. But,
did the other people there experience sort of the same thing?
No idea, because everybody started to leave at the same time. I have no idea. I've never talked to anybody about that. They experienced it for sure, but it was something that we didn't talk about because everything was just out of place and odd. When all of a sudden it came to this realization that time had slipped away, and that happened, and it definitely. So it's not something that can be debated. However, you have to look at it objectively and try to figure it out. And for the life of me, I've been thinking about it most every day for a very, very long time. No explanation. Didn't have any physical issues, or didn't feel different. Felt like I was out of it a little bit, zoned out. But that was it. That was about the worst of it. And but it happened, and it's one of those things that I know for a fact the area that I grew up in, it's a common thing, and I have no doubt that it still is a common thing. And the house that I grew up in was in this. Behind it was this vast expanse of prairie that went on for a long ways, and wide open, and at least within a corridor of about 7 by maybe 7 to 10 miles, almost square, rectangular. It's just an unusual place. I've experienced a lot of unusual things out there, and I haven't forgotten it.
Have you ever had any other experiences with possible extraterrestrial beings or entities that possibly otherworldly, or even abduction experiences?
Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to mention was that this is a thing that you hear about from time to time that people do experience, and I hadn't heard about it at that particular time that it happened. I probably hadn't heard about this happening to anybody else until I was maybe, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago or so. But excuse me. I was with a couple of friends, and we were gonna go for a hike, and basically what that entailed was we kind of hiked northwest from my yard and walked across the prairie, and the prairie for 7, 8 miles had a lot of different features, and just real interesting different places and things like that to hide out and run around in. But for the most part, it was just geological features that were a lot different than the flat town area that I grew up just north of. But one of the things that we would do is we would just walk out there, and it was nothing for us to walk 6 miles and hang out and do some stuff. And and do some things along the way and come back, and we'd be gone 10 hours. It was, our parents knew we were safe. There really wasn't anything out there that could hurt us. So we would do that. And one of the times that I'd gone out, I got to this point where we were with there's a friend my age and then another kid who had to be about 3-4 years older than we were. And we walked out there, and we were probably 6 miles from home. And I just didn't feel like I wanted to go on. I didn't want to walk any further. These guys were going to walk further, and I just didn't want to do it. There was something wrong, and it just didn't feel right. So, I told him that I was going to turn around, and my friend who was the same age as me, I told him that I wanted him to come with me. Really wasn't going to, and then finally did and decided he'd walk with me. So we turned around and started heading back. And I would say we probably went about half mile in the opposite direction. And all of a sudden there was this hum, and it was huge, loud. It came from everywhere. I mean, it came from under our feet, from the left, from the right. It came from the sky. And it was just, couldn't get away from it. It was everywhere, and it was loud. And, it felt like it was within you too, and just everywhere. And, you could almost feel like that you're driving through the mountains with the pressure of the altitude starts to make your ears feel uncomfortable. And it was almost like that. So we kind of started walking faster and looked at each other, and after about just a minute or two of that, I just yelled, "Run!" And we took off running. And there was, it came to a spot where it was, where wheat fields were planted, and they were alternate rows of bare ground and planted winter wheat. So we would walk through the wheat, the taller wheat, and then when we get to the bare earth, we would run. And so we alternated these strips for quite some time. The hum didn't go away. We ran as fast as we could, and we hit the next strip. It would give us a break and slow down, but we could really, we wanted to be running the whole time, but it was exhausting. So we did that for a while, and I couldn't really tell you at this point how long that was, but it was more than 3 miles probably, and then it stopped, and just as quick as it began, it stopped, and it just stopped dead, and then at that point we stopped, and I remember we looked at each other, and again, that was one of those things that we made it home and never talked about that again. And, there was no doubt in my mind at that point, even today, that we outran something. I don't know what we outran, but we definitely outran something and beat it. And that was one of those things in the back of my mind. I always kept wondering, what if we didn't run? What if we, what happened to this older kid that we were with? Did anything happen? Never asked him. And that was pretty typical for any of these weird experiences that I experienced with my friends, and we never asked each other anything. So, fill in the blanks. Much later, I had a car, and I was in high school, and it was a big car, big Chevy 50 or 60 six Chevy, and it was big and white and 4-door, and we had an event at school once, and I had a couple friends with me. One was my friend Scotty, and we'd had, it was probably a football game, then dance possibly, and then anyway we went to another town, and we were driving around town and talking with other kids from this other high school, and it was fairly late when we decided to drive home, and we're driving home, and I had driving this big old boat. I always had my snow tires in the back, because in Montana, you got summer tires, you have snow tires. So I had these back studded snow tires in the trunk, which there's plenty of room back there. And, you know, and I used them as spares. So if I had a flat, you know, I didn't have a flat that much, but, you know, fairly, you know, a couple of them a year just because I'm driving on these old tires. And so we're driving along and we drive over a cattle guard, which is basically keeps cattle on the right side of the fence. They come to a road and you know, blew a tire and or cut a tire and it goes down pretty quick. So we probably traveled another 100 yards or so. And you know, these guys had been with me. They knew it was no big deal. We're going to get out. Had a flashlight. It was not that dark. You know, there was a lot of stars and I'm sure the moon was out. So we really didn't need a flashlight, but I think that the car lights were on, the tail lights were on, so it was a back tire. So I got back there and I jacked up the car, and I knew where everything was by feel, and it was no problem for me to do that. You know, it wasn't one of those things where you had to put the jack away. You know, it was always laying there in the trunk ready to go, and so jacked it up really quickly and got the tire back on and started to set the car down. I stopped for a minute, and you know, there's three of us, and we're just standing there in the back of the car, and we just started talking. We're kind of standing in a little triangle there, and we're talking to each other, and all of a sudden, you know, this is odd because I'm very aware of everything that's going on, but there's this feeling that came over me, and like I didn't have any feeling at all. It's like no emotion. All of a sudden, I had no emotion. We all stopped talking. I had no emotion in my body. To say my body was numb, I guess isn't really true. It sort of is, but you know, it's like everything around me was my own body temperature, almost like if I was in liquid because it was comfortable. It wasn't that cool out, wasn't that hot out. It was just perfect temperature. But again, I didn't have any emotion, nothing. We were just staring at each other, and I'm aware of it. But I'm looking at them, looking at me, and I know they're not aware of it. I mean, I know they're somewhere else. I mean, they're looking right through me. I mean, it's like I'm not even there, but I'm, you know, I'm moving my eyes. I know I am, and I'm looking back and forth with them, trying to pick up signals, trying to figure out what's going on. And I mean, I had a pretty good feeling what was going on, and I didn't really understand what was about to happen, but I thought something very unusual was going to happen, and I felt it was related to all these other unusual things that I'd felt in the past. But there was this whoosh, and I heard this whoosh or felt it. It's hard to say I even heard it because I didn't even feel my ears were working because I couldn't hear anything. I could no longer hear. We could hear some coyotes howling while we were doing the tire. We could hear a little bit of breeze, but there was nothing. And again, it felt like my ears were kind of plugged up. So there was this whoosh, and came from kind of directly southwest of us, and it was coming at us. And when I say it's coming at us, I'm talking about maybe 3 seconds. And all of a sudden, whoosh, and we're not outside of it. And so these my two friends I'm looking at, their back is facing the southwest, and their backs are. So it came from behind them, came right directly at me. I didn't see anything, but all of a sudden, you know, we're not outside anymore. We're in something, a small room, which I would say is just barely big enough for the three of us to stand. And to my right, it's kind of a opening. I hesitate to call it a hallway, but it is what it is. And so my two friends are now they're not looking at me anymore. Their backs are to me, and I'm behind them. We're still kind of in a triangle, but I'm over to the left a little bit, offset to the left, and we're just standing there. But all three of us are facing the same direction. We're looking at a wall, which is greenish, like green mud, greenish brown mud color. I can tell it's smooth. but a little bit rough. You know, it's not like it's got a lot of heavy texture to it, but I knew if I touched it and ran the hand across it that it would be slightly bumpy. And it's the same color as this gray brown thing that I saw in my bedroom, and that's what color the walls were. So these guys are in front of me, and their backs are to me, and I'm looking at them. And they're just kind of staring at this wall, and maybe there's 2 feet in front of them, 3 feet between their head and the wall, the ceiling of this thing. You know, there's no right angles at all. It's just all sloped and gradual sloping. You know, even the floor, instead of when the wall became vertical, it made a general grade, kind of a sloping up toward from the floor to the wall. Sorry, I'm not explaining that well, but the all the walls were rounded, and all the floors were rounded, and everything was rounded. And against the wall was almost like you took a bench and had it built into the wall, and then just rounded that. It would have made it hard to sit on, but you could kind of lean against it, and it would hold you up, kind of. You'd slide off of it. So that's what that looked like. And to me, you know, I had this awareness that, you know, somebody uses this as a place to sit, sort of. They don't sit like we do, but it's just kind of a sitting room of some sort. So my next recollection, and it's almost like somebody or something came into the room like a flash, like if they came in as light and just kind of materialized into to a body. So there's two small grays, typical big-eyed gray. They're looking right at my friend, and they're standing almost toe-to-toe with my friend. And then to my right is this same thing that was in my bedroom a few years prior. It is to my right and looking toward the direction of my friend, not even looking at me. My first thought was, you know, why is this thing back? And you know, again, it's not looking at me, it's not interacting with me, and I'm feeling like, you know, this thing is in charge of hanging out with me for whatever reason, but it's like an underachiever. It doesn't do anything, you know, and which I was okay with that at that point. I'm not afraid. Still kind of numb, but I'm aware of everything that's going on in this room. There's never could forget it. Everything that's going on in front of me is unfolding, and it's fairly simple. Not much is happening, but these two little gray guys they're kind of motioning slightly with their hands, and I can't see what they have in their hands because my friends are their backs are to me, and I can't see what these grays are doing, but I know what they're doing. They're somehow creating objects with their hands, like a football or a toothbrush or a spoon, a fork, whatever, and they're showing my friend these. And for whatever reason, I don't really think about why they're doing it. I'm just thinking about what they're being showed, but I know what they're being showed because if I ask the question in my mind, I know the answer. So, you know, I'm getting information at the same time. You know, it's like not like anybody's giving me this information or verbally telling me. I just know. So, like my friend Scotty, this gray is showing him a football now, and I know that these objects aren't life size. You know, I know they're just oddball sizes because they are wanting information about why we spend so much time with these objects, these everyday objects, and what they mean. You know, it's you know, I thought about it later, and it's like, you know, we interact with so many objects, and we have so many things that we have in our possession, whether it be in a little kid in his or her bedroom, or or at school, we always have possessions. And at that point, I knew that these things had nothing. I mean, they're in this room, and they have nothing. They don't own anything. They don't have property. Um, they're tied to this room and this whatever the bigger craft or whatever it is that we're in. They're tied to that, and they don't have um, any other purpose in life other than to serve inside this craft and do whatever they do. And they own nothing. So to me, it was them trying to get information about why we have so much, why we require so many crazy things in our day-to-day lives when, they have nothing. So I knew that was going on. And I was wondering, where did they come from? And I don't think I had that specific question, but it was more like, are they from outer space? And I knew that that was true at that point. They were from somewhere else. And, how do they know us? And why did they, how did they know that we were going to be there? How did they intercept us or whatever they did? And I just knew at that moment that they always know. They always know where we are. It's just like the universe is one big solid. Every time we move, we push against a solid, and every action has an opposite reaction. And that doesn't mean just physical things that we think. It sends out. If we think a thought, that thought leaves the body and goes elsewhere. And all these things kind of started to make sense at that moment. Not everything, but I was, I knew that these things could feel us. So if this thing to my right that was maybe my minder or something, some creature that's supposed to watch out for me or whatever it did, it always knew, what I was thinking, what I was doing. Didn't make sense to it. Nothing that we do makes any kind of sense to these things, but I tell other people that, and it's very controversial because they don't believe it. They believe that, other people like to believe that they have a purpose and they're serving this purpose, and they know exactly, they know all about us. But to me, at that point, at that time, I realized that they know nothing about us ever. They haven't, and they still don't get it, even after thousands of years or however long it's been, and still there's a lot of unanswered questions, and there's so many things going through my mind, and at that moment it's really hard for me to discern and to compartmentalize all these thoughts and put them together with the answer, but I did get some answers. So as we're in this room, these grays are looking at my friends and trying to ascertain some answers. I'm thinking the whole time, what are they going to do with me? And I could feel that fear in me, deep in me, but it was like not leaving the rest of my brain and affecting my body like fear normally would. It was just staying in one small spot, but I knew it was there and I could feel it there. And, I would say that this went on for, I don't know, probably about an hour. And then these things kind of like whooshed out of the room, like light was vacuumed out of the room. They were gone. And then there's this whoosh, and I'm standing out there looking at my friends outside behind my car in exactly the same spot that we were before. And they just stood there and looking at me. And I walked over, and I dropped the car all the way down to the ground, pull the jack off, throw it in the trunk, throw everything back together, and they kind of slowly got back in the car and we drove home. Didn't say a word the whole way.
Now, you said that you think that they don't have much understanding of humans. And out of the contactees, experiencers, abductees that I've spoken to, and the research that I've done, it seems to me that the grays may not even be, they may be some sort of biological robots or clones, and they may be under control of a more intelligent, more evolved being. What are your thoughts on that?
One of the things that I thought about was the fact that, when I was inside this thing, or we were inside this thing, was the color and it looked like their skin color. And as I described that, there was some kind of seat or something bulge that kind of was really low out of the wall that you could actually kind of lean against and almost sit on. Well, I thought about that. I was like, why is that, jutting out from the wall like that? It's just an odd shape. And the answer I got was, I mean, literally, I could feel, or whatever it was. However, this information got in my head, it was like, well, these creatures would lean against it, and they were almost part of the ship, like or ship. I don't even know if it was a ship. Whatever that was, whatever that room was, they're part of the room. So if they lean their bodies against that, I mean, they would almost become part of the room. And I think when they actually left the room, they became part of the wall. It was like, it's not like walking through a wall. It's like walking up to a wall and getting absorbed by the wall, and then unabsorbed by the other side, if there was another side, or whatever was on the other side. So to me, that told me that whatever their physical needs were, if they probably didn't eat, they just became part of the ship, or part of this room, or part of whatever it was. And then when they were released from it, or came away from it, they were, that was part of their life force. The craft that gets them around, or whatever their home is, they are part of that. And you know it's hard to explain, but it's just this, if it's biological, this room is biological, and if they're biological, it's just one and the same. They're part of, it's part of their, it's an extension of their body, I guess, if you put it that way. But as far as if they're biomechanical, if they're robots or whatever, I can see that. And here's the reason why. It's because their objective is just one thing, and that's to survive, and to be that whatever species that is for eternity. And they've been around a lot longer, I think, than we could ever imagine. So really, we've done a lot of weird things, and we're starting to see these things in the last less than 100 years, and you've got to realize all the weird things we've been doing in the last 100 years. I believe, and from what I've observed as a kid, and spending so much time outside, sleeping outside, looking at the stars, I believe that there's certain places above our atmosphere that these things dwell. I mean, that's where they live. Let's say, northern Montana, 400 miles up, right above the Montana prairie, these guys are living up there. And if you call it living, or whatever you call it, they're up there. And I tell people all the time, if you want to see a UFO, you go to this place in northern Montana, and take a pair of night vision goggles and just look up. You're going to see all kinds of crazy stuff happening up there, and you can usually see it with the naked eye. And I've seen it hundreds of times over the years. It's every single night it's going. And you just got to be looking at the right exact place to see these little blips kind of bouncing around like ping pong balls in the outer space. They're up there. So, they're up there, and they look at us, and we're putting stuff up there. And you know, over the years, I remember as a little kid, you know, we'd look up and you'd see a satellite, and it was pretty exciting. Um, but you know, right now, you know, you see satellites all the time. If you went to a really dark place and were able to look up, you know, over central United States and it's dark, you can see all kinds of satellites go over. Well, we're putting up a lot of debris, a lot of things up in outer space. And I think that they have some sort of reason to come down here. What that would be, I have no idea, but I know that um, they don't have a curiosity for us. It's just part of their function to um, try to figure out and possibly, you know, how to avoid us, you know, because we're getting too close because we're in their part of the sky, and they're not that far up, and you know, we may be um, fringing on their territory, so to speak. Maybe, you know, crossing some boundaries that they don't feel comfortable with, or not that they have feelings. It's just that, you know, it could stand in the way of of their success as a species for the next, you know, million years. So you know, they look down, and I think this is ridiculous, but it's not. Um, they they see these gigantic creatures in these open fields in Montana below us, and they see one man out there and controlling huge herds of cattle, you know, and then we slaughter these cattle, you know, and you know, we have dominion over this huge animal, and that's much bigger than us, and their numbers are greater usually than the rancher, and that's got to look crazy to an outsider. So we're killing all these huge creatures and we're eating them, and you know, are they concerned that they're going to get eaten? Are they, you know, these aliens or whatever they are above our heads? You know, I'm sure there's reasons for them to find out. I'm sure there's reasons to maybe look at these cattle and try
Well,
to figure out what they are, because I feel that they don't want to mess with us because they see us killing these cattle. Well, maybe they can learn from the cattle. I don't know. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of questions.
well, another recurring theme that comes up, and it's another thing that makes me think that these grays, especially, are under under control of some other higher beings, is that there's always reports of sort of like breeding programs where there'll be eggs and sperm taken from the males and females, and reports of people meeting their children on ships and all sorts of different breeding programs. Is this anything you've encountered?
You know, I hear that, and I listen to people, and I interview people that believe that. You know, to me, you know, who knows? There might be other species. There might be other aliens out there. There may be, there may be humans from the future. Who knows? But in my experience, I feel that these things are, you know, an organic creature of some sort. However, they have they're very advanced. They have a simple existence, and their existence is to do one thing, and that is survive. And you know, maybe they have these craft that they fly in. I'm sure they do. I believe that they're doing it in some way, or some sort of dimension travel that we couldn't even imagine that or even consider. So it's just the things that I experience. No, they're not gonna be collecting the eggs or crossbreeding, hybridization, because they're entirely different and separate, and you know, I truly think they're up there, and they're not that far away. Did that answer your question? I know I was a little
Yes.
wishy-washy.
No, I understand. But do you think that your encounters may have just been a different type of species or a different type of being than some of the other encounters that we've had.
Well, there's so many people that think there's, I've heard different numbers. I talked to a lady and she said she's been around ETs, and there's been 100,000 different species, and from all kinds of different dimensions and planet systems, and that's pretty complicated. And could that be true? Yeah. If I saw what I saw, why not anything else? It's the numbers out there. If you consider how many different galaxies are out there, in the billions, and how many planets are out there, the trillions of stars, whatever. It's a numbers game. I mean, it's like almost anything that you could consider could exist. You could see a planet of the apes, or you could see a mirror image of what we are doing here on our Earth. Almost anything's possible with those kind of numbers. However, why are they all coming here? Why is this so special when they have systems that are millions of light years away, but they come here? How would they get here? How would they have known we're here? It's it goes on and on and on. But I do believe that these things that I saw knew were here, and I don't think they're from here. But there could be anything out there, and it's the best tool that we have is objectivity. And the best tool we have is there for a reason, and that's for keeping us all sane and not going crazy thinking about it, but putting our heads together and finding a solution and finding out answers when we could do that. I think that's one of the things that we should reconsider each time that we feel that somebody's opinion about what the newest alien is doesn't match our own. It's time to listen.
Now, for the last few minutes that we have, I'd like to get your thoughts on what's happening right now with disclosure. Of course, I've said it before, I don't trust the sources that it's coming from. There's a lot going on with it, a lot of the leaks from military leaks and these pilots sightings, the To the Stars Academy, all this stuff is happening right now. And it's stuff we've never seen before. And again, I don't trust the sources, but I'd like to get your thoughts on what do you think is happening? Do you think it's just preparation for something or just disinformation?
Well, we have seen it before, and we see it periodically. One of the things that happens now that's different is just what you and I are doing right now. We're communicating, and we're sharing information. And I think that I've told this story quite a bit in the last couple of months, but in like 2003, 2004, I was listening to Art Bell, and he was talking about off the West Coast and sightings that they had, which were tic tacs and kind of similar to what we've had going on in 2016, 14, and 15, but kind of a repeat of that. And that information gets around very, very quickly and quicker now. And I think it stays around because, you look, just consider Facebook on its own. And you're looking at some of these same stories that are popping up over and over and over, but, under a different vehicle, a different news name or pseudo news name or something like that. So those things are popping up more frequently, and we're able to share that information a lot quicker and a lot faster and more efficiently. But to the Stars Academy, to their credit, that I guess they're doing what they want to do, but they Tom, you hear many times where he there's going to be this big news coming up, next Wednesday or whatever, and nothing really.
Yeah, I've heard it one too many times there.
A lot of times, and then the other thing too, like this, it's funny because NASA has their story and yesterday, and they're about ready to make a big announcement about life on Mars. Well, that doesn't mean anything. It's so ambiguous. You could go either way. It's a big announcement that there's no way there could be life on Mars. Big announcement is that, yeah, we saw these apes on horseback, and luckily they're locked into Mars and they can never get off of there. But I don't think there's going to be any kind of disclosure. I think personally that that's our military has this amazing hole card. We have all these rumors and whatever else, that we have all this alien technology, and some of it can be weaponized. And we have Element 115. And, so that back in, I don't remember what it was, 2006, 7, when the Russians took some calcium particles and collided them with a sheet of, I can't even remember a sheet of what, but and created a few atoms of moscovium, or 115, was in response to the rumors that we had alien craft with a whole bucket full of Element 115, and all of a sudden Russia's going at it and spending billions of dollars just to get a few atoms of this, so they can say they have it too. I think that Cold War mentality still is pervasive a little bit, and why wouldn't it be? Because technology is expensive, and pseudo technology or phantom technology, things that don't exist, lead your enemy to a place where they need to create the next biggest, strongest, baddest thing. So if you keep them in disinformation, they spend a lot of money and time in creating or trying to create new technology, and of course, in ways they benefit, in other ways we benefit, because it's a huge waste of time for some of those things that they're trying to do. But I don't think so. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think there's going to be any disclosure. I don't think there's anything to disclose. Not that I'm not saying there's nothing up there. I'm saying that we don't have anything. And I think it's clever for people to suggest that, hey, if you're going to be abducted, make sure you grab a spark plug or something from whatever machine you're in, and yeah, we don't have anything, I don't think. And if we did, I think it's a well kept secret, and makes our enemies wonder how strong we really are.
So you don't think our military industrial complex has reverse engineered craft and materials that they've been using for a long time?
I don't think we have. I think if we had something, the technology would be mind bending. Could we find out anything? Possibly. I think that I think that it's ignorant to say that we could take something like a craft like that and break it down and figure it out. If these things came from billions of years in our past to get here, or millions and trillions of miles, or whatever, or if they cross some time barriers, I mean that's some big technology there, and that'd be way in our future. even, we have all these elements and metals and things on this planet, but I don't think we have that, and I don't think we have that in our future. But it's fun to think about.
Very good. Now, I happen to believe that we've had access to a lot of this technology for a long time. I think we've possibly been reverse engineering craft, and the military just keeps this for their war technology, and they slowly roll it out over time. They've continuously done that, and I think that the possible reason for this so-called disclosure is so that they can slowly roll out a few more of those toys that they've been hiding.
That's a good point, because I do have to believe that we have some things that technologies move fast in the last 50 years. I mean, we had an industrial revolution, but we had a technology revolution that's huge, and now to this point where we just do you think they would even have to roll it out slowly? I mean, nobody even pays attention.
Right. The technology is now moving so fast that they could come out with something unbelievable, and we probably wouldn't even bat an eye.
Right. We don't even think about it, So, I mean, we talked about, microchips and how silicon chips and how things have become so small and so micro and wow. Our big thing, internet and this technology you and I are using right now, it's really not a big thing anymore, but it just happened overnight, and it's just in volume. And people don't consider also how much stuff there actually is. How do we make 500 million computers a year on this planet? Like, how does that even happen? Wow.
Yeah, we're definitely living in interesting times. Things are moving in a fascinating direction. And, I look forward to seeing what our future holds. And Cameron, I want to thank you again for joining us tonight. That was a fascinating discussion, and we'll have to have you back in the future.
Absolutely, brother.
All right, well, you have an excellent night.